making the tunnel through these mountains New Zealand's longest road tunnel, not in length, but in times of vicious weather, extremely hard rock, and avalanches all contributed to making the tunnel through these mountains New Zealand's longest road tunnel. Not in terms of length, but in terms of time taken to build it.
A research flight in the Chugach Mountains of Alaska. A team of scientists is here to test the effectiveness of techniques for controlling a capricious killer that has caused fascination and fear for as long as people have lived and traveled in the mountains. The scientists' aim is to predict, perhaps one day control, the avalanche. They hit without warning, taking everything and everyone in their path, killing more than 200 people a year. Only a lucky few who are caught survive.
Brad decided he wanted to go and traverse across the north-facing slope and come down through the trees, so I agreed to go with him. I think at that point we realized we might be in a spot of danger. Yet still we were so ignorant as to the mechanics of avalanches. We always thought avalanches, yeah, sure they happen, but they always happen to other people. We'll be fine, you know. If one happened, we'd be able to swim out of it or we'll outrun it. I'm telling you, I had absolutely no power. I was at complete mercy of that raging snow.
About force, I like to compare that with a tiger. When you see a tiger moving, this elegance, this lightness, you wouldn't expect that strength, that power in that beast, in that animal. For somebody who doesn't know about avalanches, I think the picture of the tiger might help him to visualize that it's better not to be caught by the claws of an avalanche.
Around the world, there are upwards of 1 million avalanches a year, each carrying thousands of tons of snow at incredible speeds. And every year, as more and more people venture into the mountains, the death toll rises.
Most people have no idea the incredible power of an avalanche. I mean, they break out about 3 or 4 feet deep. They may be 100 yards across, a tremendous volume of snow. They start moving very, very quickly. Just within the first couple of seconds, they start breaking up into pieces, and those pieces again break up into more pieces, and they start tumbling you. And just within 3 or 4 seconds, these things are going 40 miles an hour. And snow goes up your nose, it goes into your mouth, it goes into your underwear, it goes everywhere. Everything that's not tied down gets ripped off. The third of the people that get killed in avalanches are killed by trauma.
This experiment graphically demonstrates an avalanche's lethal effects. Real people, if they survived the fall, would have been encased so tightly in the snow that they could hardly move their chests enough to breathe.
If you think that these things are nice fluffy snow. They may have started out as nice fluffy snow, but by the time they've gotten ground up and heated up on the way down, when it comes to a stop, it just instantly sets up like concrete. And if you're stuck in this position, then that's the position you're stuck in. You can hardly even move your little finger. If you got your hand close enough to the surface, you might be able to wiggle it around and get an airspace or something like that. But you can't just pop up out of these things. You can't dig yourself out.
For centuries in Europe, avalanches have been called the White Death. In 1951, heavy snows caused massive slides throughout the Alps. One swept over the small village of Heiligenblut. 84 people died. In 1916, during the Great War, the Austrians and Italians triggered avalanches by firing across the valleys at the slopes above each other's troops. In a single winter in the Tyrol Mountains, the avalanches they created killed between 40 and 80,000 men. But most avalanches are not under human control. They happen because of subtle differences in strength between the layers of snow that settle on the slopes. Temperature, wind, and even sunlight all change the layers over time. Some become soft and crumbly, others strengthen into hard slabs. If a strong layer develops on top of a weak one, and the weak layer crumbles under the weight of it, the slab shears away from the snowpack and slides in the only direction it can, down. To test at what point the weak layer will break, researchers use snow cores taken from the mountain slopes. The cores are tested by spinning them faster and faster inside a centrifuge. Just as in the laboratory the weakest snow core breaks, so on a mountainside the weakest layer can break and shear, releasing the slab above it.
You have in your mind some idea.
Doug Fessler is one of the world's greatest avalanche experts. His job includes teaching skiers and mountain guides to recognize the danger signs of an avalanche.
Get some pit information, okay?
People look at me like I'm an expert, but I feel like I know so very little compared to what there is to know. And I think that's also one of the appealing things about the avalanche field, is that the only rule of thumb is there are no rules of thumb. And you never will know it. There are literally thousands of combinations of layering in the snowpack, and you're not going to be able to see them all in your lifetime.
The snow's surface gives no clue to the avalanche risk. So the classic method of finding weak layers is to dig a cross-section down through the snowpack.
How well is it bonded, and what kind of force is it going to take to rip it out? That's all I really need to know. So first of all, do I have a slab? I'll start feeling here, and I feel resistance as I pull down. It goes fairly hard to begin with. Now it's starting to go a little easier. A little more resistance again. Starts to go a little easier right in through here. Right through here it's a crushed layer. Now it's very easy right in there. Another shear plane possibly. This is a nasty shear plane. Look how this stuff just falls out of here. But probably the best source...
Doug Fessler is searching in particular for a layer of granules called sugar snow that are so loose they hardly stick together at all.
I broom this down. And we're corroborating the opinion we have about the hardness and the weakness of these various layers. This stuff is so weak, it just falls out. Intermediate faceted snow, the sugar snow. More people have probably died in the world as a result of this weak layer than any other weak layer there is. Okay, so we've identified now that we've got a slab layer with a weak layer beneath it, but what we still don't know is what the shear strength of that particular weak layer is. What kind of force is it going to take to rip that out? So we need to find out something about the bonding of the snow. So in order to do that, I'm going to make a few different...
Without access to lab tests like the centrifuge, Doug Fessler uses a rough and ready substitute. This test is crude, but it's sufficient to establish how easily the slab layer will detach from the weak layer below it.
Roughly 12, 14 inches. And very gently cut down here. Notice I have my hand ready just in case this thing pops out on me. Okay, now we got a freestanding column. I want to make sure the ski is nice and vertical. You see how that came out? Just like it's spring-loaded. That's what I would call a very easy shear. I never even really got a chance to slide the whole ski in there. By integrating all of that information together, there should be a picture flashing in front of your mind. And the picture is one of the serious instability that exists from a human-triggered point of view. And so the message there is to stay off of steep, leeward, smooth slopes, because those are the ones that are waiting to eat you. And what I want you to do is on the count of 3, I want you to go 1, 2, 3, up in the air, and then punch your heels in real hard. Ready, Bonsai Warriors? Hey, 1, 2, 3, Bonsai!
An avalanche in miniature, a piece of fun, but with a serious purpose. The ideal slope angle for an avalanche is anywhere between 30 and 45 degrees. The average slab weighs 1,500 tons and travels about 50 miles an hour. Sometimes the entire slab becomes airborne, gliding on a cushion of air. These are powder avalanches and reach speeds of 150 miles an hour, pushing a devastating shockwave ahead of them. Almost nothing can survive in their path. This is a loose snow or wet avalanche. It occurs when the entire snowpack becomes weak and loses its cohesion. The snow turns into a thick slush and trickles down the mountain. Wet avalanches only move at 2 or 3 miles an hour, but they are unstoppable and their destructive power can be enormous. This one overran the town of Oder in the Norwegian fjords. The path it took was ground into an unrecognizable pulp. But all avalanches leave a trail of destruction. Doug Fesler visits every avalanche site he can reach to learn more about them.
Well, the avalanche we're looking at today started right below the cliff band up there. Has a soft slab avalanche, and it rained a lot of low-density snow along the track as it came down. It was probably traveling at speeds of 80 to 120 miles an hour. It hit some of these trees over here that are 2 to 3 feet in diameter. They're probably 150 to 200 years old. Carried them down slope, dusted 4 residential structures at the bottom. This avalanche could come a lot further, but in this particular case, these folks were lucky because it stopped right on the edge.
The people living here were completely unaware of the fact that their homes had been built in a high-risk avalanche zone.
It just really awed me at the destruction. It could have very easily destroyed my garage, my house, both at the same time. You know, a couple of structures that to me are my castle and that I think will always stand. And viewing this, they wouldn't have a chance. I have definitely been educated in this last week on the devastation of avalanches, what to look out for. Not that you can prevent them, but definitely be aware of them so that if there is a possibility of one, you know, your family is obviously more important. And I would definitely be packing bags and moving out for a while.
If you consider a family in a house and a major avalanche hit their unprotected building, the first thing they'd notice would be vibrations and shuddering as the avalanche approached the building at 150 miles an hour. The windows would be blown out, the roof would be lifted off, snow would enter the building, immediately compacting to a high density inside the building. Fragments of debris would be flying through the air. It would be a very unfortunate way to go.
The experts make conquering the snow look so easy, but the extreme conditions are not the only challenge they face on the mountains. Just the weight of a passing skier is often all it takes to cause an avalanche. Here, 2 of these 3 skiers are about to cross the slope on the left, which is a slab of strong snow lying over a weaker layer below. They start a crack in the weak layer, which spreads out under the surface, and eventually the whole slab detaches. The third skier moves to the right towards safety, only to be caught by a second slide set off by vibrations from the first. Miraculously, all 3 skiers were rescued alive.
We stopped at one point in the hill, about 3 feet away from each other, and we're looking downhill, and suddenly there was just a sharp jerk, and the whole hill that I was aware of began to move, and we were on top of it. As if some giant had taken a knife and sliced above us. And I knew immediately what was happening. I knew we were on top of a very large slide.
This is a skier's worst nightmare. A soft slab avalanche will engulf you in almost liquid snow. A hard slab breaks into churning blocks as large and heavy as cars.
The cracks in the slab we were on formed cracks in those cracks, and the whole tremendous mass began to churn, and I got sucked into it. The thing gained velocity so quickly, it was amazing. I saw the trees coming at us. All I could think of was wedging my board against a tree and hopefully being thrown against it and grabbing it. But as I hit, I just jerked around because I hit a bit off center and my gloves flipped off the tree. All I could see was the tree just... Within 30 yards, we were going 30 miles an hour, gaining 10 miles an hour every 10 feet. I felt like a rag doll in a huge wave with absolutely no control. It took every ounce of breath out of your lungs, and I couldn't see anything, I couldn't hear anything, I had no sense of smell. The only sensation I had was traveling at an incredibly violent velocity and just hitting solid objects with my body. Tremendous impact, just boom, boom. And it didn't hurt, and I couldn't really feel any pain at all. And all I could think was, I'm dying at age 18 and it doesn't even hurt.
The avalanche broke Cameron's leg and left him buried to his waist in snow so hard he could not dig himself out. But he was lucky. He survived. The friend he was with did not.
Brad ended up 5 feet under the snow. He had severe head and neck trauma and severe internal injuries. It took him 45 minutes for them to get to him. He was packed so tightly and the snow was so cold that they thought they might have a good chance of reviving him, but they just couldn't do it. He died doing something we both love to do, and on a very good day as well. Just not a day that we should have been up there.
How were they to the left of you?
Gosh, I
This
really
side?
don't know. I had my back to them,
You had
but
your
it
back
seemed
to
like
them?
they were up a little higher and up to the right.
Okay, look to the right. General area to the right of these little trees.
There's 3 people.
Okay, were they all on skis?
For those that don't die in the fall, this is what awaits them. Almost half the people caught in avalanches end up buried.
Got it, Paul? No.
Right here. Probe right here. I'm not going down.
Asphyxiation kills long before the cold. The chances of surviving a burial of more than 30 minutes are only 50%. After 3 hours, just 10% are recovered alive. Training rescuers to react quickly is vital.
Hang in there. Get that other bag. Coming for you. Hang in there.
Bob, you look like you've been in an avalanche.
Okay.
The speed of the rescue team's response can mean the difference between life or death. In the 1950s, there were only a quarter of the avalanche fatalities there are today. In the last few decades, the death toll has risen dramatically with the increase in popularity of winter sports. This has put more pressure on researchers to forecast avalanches.
Good morning, this is Bruce Tremper with your Backcountry Avalanche and Mountain Weather Advisory. Today is Saturday, it's January 15th and it's 7:30 in the morning. I have issued an avalanche warning for the...
Every day, Bruce Tremper of the Avalanche Forecasting Center in Utah records an avalanche advisory which people across the state can phone in and listen to.
30 degrees or steeper. 2 snowmobilers triggered an avalanche and were buried near Cutler Ridge on Ben Lomond in the Ogdenary Mountains yesterday. Other east-facing and south-facing...
The forecast is broadcast on several radio stations and also posted on the internet.
One of the most pervasive myths about avalanches is that they somehow magically come down from up above when you shout too loud or something like that. Well, it just doesn't happen. Here in Utah, for instance, about 99% of the people that get caught in avalanches trigger the avalanche which catches them. And in other words, we've met the enemy, and the enemy is us. The kind of people that are getting killed in avalanches through the years, of course, have changed. It started out just being skiers at ski areas and climbers, and that's changed as people push into the backcountry more. It's become more backcountry skiers, and now that snowboarders are here, it's become snowboards.
Big storm coming in tomorrow. If you can't ski tomorrow, then that's just enough.
Yeah, I would just get the chairs. Okay. How many? 3? Okay. So I'll just get the 3 out of 4.
Summits Yuri, Steve, Rob, Foster, Goldstone, Whitaker, Lewis, Mary Ellen, and the 2 North Star guys. In terms of what we're going to open, I don't know. Casey, go check out the High Traverse. I don't think it froze.
Every day, the ski patrols meet to assess the avalanche risk on the slopes, trying to predict how the recent weather and today's storm forecast might affect it.
Are you doing the field?
Even in the worst conditions, ski patrols go out to inspect the avalanche-prone slopes, hoping to be able to close early any areas at risk after the new snowfall. But it's a fine balancing act. Resorts exist to make money, and closed roads and runs turn no profit. The resorts are monitored constantly for any signs of trouble, but the decisions ski patrols make are largely based on their knowledge of local danger areas, as much intuition and experience as science. The hard science is mostly in Europe, in research stations in Switzerland and France.
Météo France Grenoble, bonjour. Nous sommes le mercredi 26 avril. Voici l'estimation des risques d'avalanche sur les massifs de l'Isère.
The Alps account for more than half of all avalanche deaths worldwide, more than 120 a year, compared with just 20 in America and Canada combined. The French National Meteorological Office runs a network of weather stations that collect data on recent snowfalls, solar radiation, temperature and wind speed. Each time they forecast a heavy snowstorm, they will issue an avalanche warning. This does save lives, but it only allows the meteorologists to generate an avalanche forecast over wide areas. The approach does not allow them to predict at the smaller scale of individual mountains. So nearby in the Swiss Alps, at the Davos Research Institute, Dr. Otmar Buser is trying a different approach. He's studying the history of actual avalanches that are known to have occurred on particular mountains.
All this probability that something will occur is based on old data. So my idea was then that you have to select all those days in the past that must be very similar to the day that you would like to have a forecast. Well, the problem was then how to extract these days, because you are looking for similar days. Similar days of what? Of snow condition? Of weather? No, of avalanches.
Buser's system is based on the assumption that if today's weather is similar to a particular day in the past, then the pattern of avalanches should also be similar. He has developed a database of weather conditions and avalanches over the last 20 years on key mountains around Switzerland. Feed in today's weather and match it with a day in the past which had comparable weather and lots of avalanches, and there's a good chance of correctly predicting an avalanche. It seems to work.
I have no mathematical proof that it's the best you can do. The only thing I know, the customer is satisfied.
In fact, Buser's system has rapidly become the most widely used computer forecasting technique in the world. But the ultimate target for scientists is to forecast at an even smaller scale, to predict with complete confidence exactly when a specific slope on a mountainside will avalanche. This is what Laurent Busson is trying to do. He's a snow scientist at the Senegreffe Research Institute in Grenoble, France, where he creates and analyzes virtual computer models of specific avalanche-prone slopes above a nearby village. By combining information about the precise contours of the hillside with data about the snow thickness and the weather conditions that control its stability, he hopes one day to be able to predict exactly where and when an avalanche will be triggered and released on these starting zones high above the valley. But this research is still a long way from everyday use, because the scientists need to understand the microscopic strengths and weaknesses of snowflakes once they have fallen. Snowflakes are ice crystals grown in the freezing temperatures high inside clouds. They share a six-sided symmetry and the same flat shape, but each is, as the cliché goes, unique. It is the precise shape of the snow crystals that determines if weak snow layers or strong slabs will form and whether an avalanche will occur. If the crystals remain sufficiently spiky, they can lock together in a complex tangle. A layer of these crystals will become a strong slab in the snowpack. And the layers of crystals in the snowpack are continually changing. A layer of spiky crystals can partially melt, weakening a strong slab. The meltwater often trickles down to a lower layer of the snowpack and refreezes, welding the crystals there into another strong layer. Weak layers can develop in several ways. Feather-shaped crystals of hoarfrost freeze onto the snow's surface. The crystals are extremely fragile, and they will form a weak layer inside the snowpack if they become buried by a new snowfall. Other weak layers are formed by temperature changes deep inside the snowpack. Water evaporates and recrystallizes into new crystal shapes, forming a layer of loose, gravelly sugar snow crystals as weakly bound together as grains of sand. The tiniest disturbance, and the crystals of the weak layer can no longer hold the strong snow above it in place. Understanding, and perhaps one day controlling avalanches, depends on painstakingly close analysis of snow's crystal structure. In a cold room at the Davos Institute, a block of snow is cut and stained for the microscope. The aim is to learn more about how these ice crystals lock together in 3 dimensions.
When you have fresh snow, there is about 90% of that volume of snow is air, just air. 10% only is ice, and snow is a mixture of ice grains or ice crystals, and air.
Otmar Buser uses his microscopic slices to build up 3D models. He hopes these will help him understand the large-scale physical behavior of snow on the mountains. The aim is to one day predict exactly when a particular snowpack will become unstable. Across the border in Grenoble, the objective is the same, the method different. Powdered snow is put into a metal tube and placed in a sphere that bathes the sample in white light. A detector measures how well the snow absorbs light from different parts of the spectrum. Each type of snow crystal has its own distinctive absorption pattern, so the researchers can identify the crystal type from its spectrum fingerprint. The spectrum also tells them how much sunlight and heat different types of crystals will absorb on the slopes. The hope is that one day this information may help them anticipate when a layer of the snowpack is likely to become dangerous. But it may be years before this research bears fruit. In the meantime, people will continue to get caught. The immediate challenge is to help them survive. The science of predicting avalanches accurately is still years beyond our reach, so safety continues to be heavily reliant on a basic, practical approach.
Advance. Probe down.
The run-out zone left by the avalanche is vast and deep. The rescue party forms a line to comb through the snow using probe poles, but it's like searching for a needle in a haystack. A pole could miss the victim by inches, and the line would move on.
And put them on receive. Everybody know how to do that? Mechanics of the beacon?
Safety beacons are vital survival tools. They transmit and receive radio signals. Normally, they are set to transmit, but any survivors not trapped by the avalanche can switch their beacons over to receive the signal from victims who have been buried.
Yep, I'm getting it too.
In this training exercise, a rucksack has been buried with a beacon in it. Over the years, many other devices have been developed to improve a victim's chances of rescue, but very few have been widely accepted. This one uses an airbag that the skier can inflate with a ripcord. The idea is that the airbag floats the victim to the top of the snow during the avalanche, keeping them at the surface when the snow sets hard. But the most reliable method of rescue comes not from technology, but nature. A dog's acute sense of smell, combined with their obvious mobility, make them a great deal more efficient as detectives than any technological device.
Good boy, Kyle. Take him. Come on. Get him out of there. Get him out of there. You got something? Come on. Take him out.
Rescue crews began arriving by mid-morning after calling off the search late last night. The avalanche caused substantial damage to
In 1982, 65,000 tons of snow slid down onto the ski resort of Alpine Meadows in just 15 seconds. It killed 7 employees.
The fracture line was along the crest just below the trees there, and it ranged from 8 to 12, maybe even 15 feet deep. I don't believe anyone here at the time felt that that slope could produce an avalanche of that size. Some of the scientific engineer types in hindsight said that they knew that that could happen. But I would say practitioners like myself who came and visited following the slide generally agreed, how could something that big happen on such a relatively small avalanche slope?
An avalanche this size only happens once every 100 years. It devastated all but the steel frame of this lodge and buried the surrounding area under tens of feet of snow.
When I came to, I had absolutely no idea at all what had happened. I thought something had exploded and that the house had fallen down over the top of us. The whole time that I was buried, there was one day that I could hear them yelling my name. I could hear them calling out, trying to find me, and I was yelling back. They couldn't hear me. And my thought was, I hope they find me soon, because I really want to thank them for getting me out of here.
Anna Conrad was pulled alive from the wreckage of the building 5 days after the avalanche struck. She lost her leg to frostbite, and her boyfriend died.
Thank you. Oh, good.
Put your hat on.
And on day 5, actually the storm broke, and we had some blue sky. The searchers right at the location pulled a board off, and his hand comes out, and it's Anna's hand. And I still recall the joy of that moment. It had been hopeless, and people were dead. She was dead, I thought, and she was alive. And the searchers, a cheer went up when the helicopter lifted off, and it was a moment to remember.
You don't want to die. There's no reason to want to die. So you just keep pushing, knowing that eventually sometime you're going to make it.
I came out of it relatively well, and I responded positively. I think it forced me to respond positively because I didn't need to become depressed over having lost part of my body. The hardest part was losing my boyfriend. That was obviously a very difficult situation.
Incredibly, there are always people prepared to take the risk of building their homes in avalanche-prone areas. This house in the Utah mountains, like all new buildings in the valley, is being built from steel-reinforced concrete.
My general recommendation is to avoid building in avalanche paths altogether. That's the best mitigation or safety procedure you can use. It's almost impossible to do that here at Alta, because if you want to build up here at all, it's pretty hard to miss avalanche paths. The canyon is narrow, the storms are big, and the snowpack is continuous for a good part of the year, so it's a great place for avalanches to reach the valley bottom.
Laboratory testing is an indispensable part of designing new buildings in avalanche-prone regions. Engineers use a tank of dyed water to simulate a powder avalanche. When the avalanche hits the wall, it leaps over the top and becomes airborne, and a vortex of high-pressure snow curls back, hitting the downhill side of the wall. This is the Lady of the Snow's chapel in Alta. The old chapel was twice decimated by an avalanche. Art Mears helped design its replacement.
When and if the avalanche runs over the surface of the building, it will produce a back pressure blast that will put pressure in on those windows, so those window panes have been specially designed for avalanches. The pressures resulting from that avalanche would be 10 to 15 times the strength of a normal building.
In the Alps, builders have lived with avalanches for centuries. The upsloped side of this chapel has been built like a boat's prow to split and deflect the snow. Avalanches are impossible to avoid here. Below the peaks, towns and villages stretch in an almost continuous ribbon along the valley floors. Inevitably, some built-up areas will lie in the paths of avalanches. Engineers use detailed ground surveys to decide on a cost-effective approach to avalanche protection. This is a map of the primary avalanche paths of the Chamonix Valley, 12,000 feet below Mont Blanc. The steep sides of the valley are perfect starting zones for avalanches. Simple population pressure has pushed new suburbs of Chamonix into the avalanche path of the Tacana Glacier. So a massive system of concrete conduits and barriers now protects the new chalets and buildings in the bottom of the valley.
The Tacana Glacier avalanche protection systems has a cost around 25 million francs. It's a huge sum of money, but we need to relate it to the houses which are protected by this system. The biggest problem was the size of the avalanches involved. First, we have concrete deflectors to split the flow of the avalanche. We have also big breaking mounds and also large flat areas on which the snow is supposed to deposit. And to prevent the avalanches from flowing outside the system, we built large dams of reinforced earth. Since the construction system was built, and we get several avalanches in the same year, for instance, this year we get at least 3 large avalanches on this path. And the system was okay, it works.
Even roads have to be protected. Without protection, an avalanche would bury a passing car under feet of ice and snow, killing its occupants. This road in Colorado is protected by large conical braking mounds which split and slow the avalanche. But this kind of avalanche protection is expensive and therefore rare. It is used only when the risks are high and there is no alternative. This is a much more common form of protection. Ski patrolmen regularly fire into the mountains to induce small avalanches that, if left, would build up and later engulf roads and buildings.
All clear! Ready, fire! Fire!
Ski patrols also use hand chargers. Snow cornices are removed before they can fall and perhaps trigger an avalanche on the slope below. Across America, more than 100,000 rounds of explosive are used in avalanche protection every year. Ski cutting forms another part of their armory. By skiing just above an unstable slab, an expert can often start a small avalanche under controlled conditions. the search is still on for a more permanent and less dangerous solution. The most promising approach is to prevent the snowpack from ever developing. In Grenoble, the researchers use sand in a wind tunnel to simulate the behavior of snow. The laser highlights a cross-section of the sand as it blows over the model fence. The researchers use these tests to build fences on the mountain ridges. As it blows over the fence, the wind forms eddies, which slow it down, allowing the snow to fall exactly where the scientists want it to. The fences are a common sight on mountain ridges in the Alps, running just below the windward side of the ridge. The snow falls before it reaches the ridgeline, preventing cornices from forming and keeping dangerous slabs from developing on the other side. Another technique is to use steel barriers to prevent the slabs that do develop from turning into avalanches. The barriers are tested for strength in a snowshoot. The hope is that they will catch an avalanche before its snow has slid more than a few feet. But the barriers are expensive and an unsightly part of the landscape. There is a natural alternative. Trees can help break up and slow small avalanches, preventing the worst of their effects. And stands of trees can help hold the snow cover in place. Forests have protected alpine villages for centuries. The first recorded edict forbidding the cutting of trees above a village dates from 1397. But the future of the Alps' protective tree stands is uncertain. Expanding ski resorts are pushing into more exposed areas, often destroying the tree cover as they go. At least in part, they are creating the avalanche threat they will inevitably face. Avalanches may become part of the price that must be paid for our enjoyment of the mountains.
I think the average skier who skis here is not aware of the avalanche problem. Certainly some people who ski here a lot and are regulars are aware of it and they see us throwing bombs, but I talk to a lot of the customers. I'd say they're fairly oblivious to the whole thing. They're here to have a good time.
Life matters. Every day it matters. And there's a lot of pleasure in living your life that way. And I think that's why people climb. That's why people hang glide. That's why people live that way close to the edge, because it gives them whatever it is that they're looking for in life.
I still have friends that will push it on very dangerous days. Friends that knew Brad and I both, and it's infuriating, but I can't take responsibility for their lives too. That's their own situation, and I hope none of them meet with the same misfortune I did.
In the last 20 years, I've dug out or participated in the body recoveries of, I think, 23 or 24 different fatalities, avalanche fatalities. And that part gets very old. I get tired of trying to explain to the wife of a person that's just died why her husband died.